Rain hammered the streets of South Boston like bullets against concrete. Water ran in rivers down cracked sidewalks, pooling in gutters that couldn't drain fast enough. The city drowned under black clouds, and somewhere in that chaos, a man collapsed to his knees outside a private clinic. His name was Kieran Vale, and he was bleeding. Not from a wound anyone could see, not from violence that left marks people would notice, but bleeding all the same, warm and terrifying, soaking through his jeans as he clutched his stomach and tried to breathe through the pain tearing him apart from the inside. He was an Omega, pregnant, and alone. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. His fingers shook so badly he couldn't hold himself steady. Rain plastered his shirt to his skin, made his hair stick to his forehead in dark streaks. Every breath came sharp and shallow, like his lungs had forgotten how to work. He pressed both hands against his belly, instinctively trying to protect the tiny life inside him, even as his body screamed that something was terribly wrong. "Not now," he whispered, voice cracking. "Please, not now." Across the street, the clinic doors opened. Light spilled out onto the wet pavement, golden and warm, cutting through the storm like a knife. A man stepped out under the covered awning, expensive shoes clicking against tile, tailored coat hanging perfectly from broad shoulders. He moved like someone who'd never had to ask for anything twice in his life. Dorian Cross, Apha, heir to the Cross syndicate, the kind of man who owned half of Boston without anyone saying his name out loud. And standing beside him, laughing like cruelty was entertainment, was the one person Kieran had come here hoping not to see. Soren Halwick. Kieran's ex, the Alpha who'd promised him everything and delivered nothing but abandonment the second Kieran's scent changed. The second the pregnancy test came back positive. Kieran forced himself to stand, legs wobbling, vision swimming. He could feel the blood now, sticky and warm between his thighs, and terror clawed at his throat. "Soren," he called out, voice barely carrying over the rain. "Please, just listen to me." Soren turned slowly, like he had all the time in the world. His expression shifted from surprise to something far worse. "Disgust." "Still following me," Soren's voice cut through the storm, sharp and mocking. "You're pathetic, Kieran." The words hit like a physical blow. Kieran swallowed hard, throat burning. "I'm not following you," he said, quieter now. I need help, the baby." Soren's smile turned vicious, theatrical, like he was performing for an audience. "The baby," he said it loud enough for Dorian and the security guards to hear. "Oh my God, you're still pretending that's mine." Kieran froze. Ice flooded his veins, not because of the insult, he'd endured plenty of those since Soren disappeared, but because Soren said it like the truth was a joke, like Kieran's reality was fiction. And Kieran knew the truth. He'd been careful, he'd counted the days. He'd lived with the weight of it alone for months, because Soren had vanished the moment Kieran's body started changing, the moment it became clear he was carrying life. "I'm not pretending," Kieran said, voice shaking. "You know what happened, you." Soren suddenly strode forward and shoved him. "It's hard." Kieran's feet slipped on the wet pavement. His arms flew out, trying to catch himself, but gravity won. He hit the ground with a cry that tore from his chest, and pain exploded across his stomach like something inside had cracked open. He couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. His hands flew to his belly, eyes wide with terror as he felt it. The wrongness, the way his body was trying to reject the one thing he'd fought so hard to protect. And then Soren did something worse. He lifted his foot and kicked him. Not in the face, not where it would look dramatic or draw too much attention, but in the ribs, low and deliberate, a blow that looked careless but felt like punishment. Kieran's breath left his body in a strangled gasp. His vision whited out for a second, pain so sharp it felt like dying. A group of clinic staff stood near the entrance, watching. They saw everything, but they looked away, pretending they'd seen nothing. Because they recognized Soren Halwick. Because they feared him. Soren crouched beside Kieran and leaned in close, voice dropping to a poisonous whisper only Kieran could hear. "You should have gotten rid of it," he hissed. "Nobody wants a broken Omega and his mistake." Tears streamed down Kieran's face, mixing with rain, not from weakness, from a kind of heartbreak so deep it felt like his soul was tearing in half. Soren stood and spoke louder, playing to the crowd again. "Get up, Kieran, stop embarrassing yourself." He turned to Dorian like this was a show, like Kieran was nothing more than entertainment. Dorian hadn't moved. but his eyes had. And in them was something cold, measured, dangerous. Because Dorian Cross didn't look entertained. He looked like he'd just witnessed something that offended his entire sense of order. Kieran tried to crawl away, hands scraping against wet concrete, his vision blurred. He could feel it now, the blood spreading, warm and terrifying. He whispered, "No, no, no." And then he heard it. Steady footsteps approaching through the rain. Kieran looked up and saw Dorian walking toward him, coat open, rain soaking through his collar, unmoved by the storm like he didn't belong to nature, like nature belonged to him. Soren barked a laugh. "Don't tell me you're getting sentimental, Cross." Dorian didn't answer. He just kept walking. Did Kieran just lose everything in the rain, or was something far more dangerous about to begin? Dorian stopped 3 feet away from where Kieran lay curled on the ground, body trembling, hands pressed against his stomach like he could hold himself together through sheer will. For a moment Dorian just stood there, silent, rain drumming against his shoulders. His expression didn't change. No anger, no pity, just cold calculation, the kind that made men in boardrooms sign contracts they didn't understand. Soren shifted, uncomfortable now, like he'd suddenly realized this wasn't playing out the way he'd expected. "Cross, seriously," Soren said, forcing a laugh. "You're not actually going to." Dorian's gaze flicked to him, and Soren's words died in his throat. It wasn't a look of rage, it was worse. It was the look of someone deciding whether you were worth the effort of killing. Kieran tried to push himself up, but his arms gave out. He collapsed back onto the pavement, gasping, vision swimming. The pain in his abdomen was getting worse, sharper, like something inside was breaking apart piece by piece. He could feel the blood soaking through his jeans now, warm and sticky, and terror clawed at his chest. "Not the baby," he whispered, voice barely audible. "Please, not the baby." Soren heard him and he laughed. It wasn't a loud laugh, just a quiet, cruel sound that cut through the rain like a blade. "You're still worried about that thing," Soren said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You should have gotten rid of it months ago, would have saved us both the trouble." Kieran's breath hitched, tears streamed down his face, but he didn't make a sound, just stared at the man he'd once loved, the man who'd promised him safety and saw nothing but a stranger. Dorian crouched beside Kieran, slow and deliberate, like he was approaching something fragile. Kieran flinched, instinctively pulling away, because Alpha's had only ever been danger. Alpha's had only ever hurt him. But Dorian's hand hovered, not grabbing, not claiming, just steady. "Look at me," Dorian said, voice quiet but commanding. Kieran's trembling eyes met his. Dorian's gaze flicked to Kieran's belly, then back to his face. His jaw tightened just slightly, like he'd seen something that confirmed a suspicion. "Can you breathe?" Dorian asked. Kieran nodded, barely. Dorian exhaled slowly, controlled. Then he did something nobody expected. He pulled off his coat and draped it over Kieran like a shield. The warmth of it hit Kieran like a shock. The scent was sharp, cedar and smoke and something deeper, primal, Alpha, but not suffocating, not threatening. Protective. Kieran's breath caught, his fingers curled into the fabric, trembling. Soren's voice snapped across the street, sharp with irritation. "What are you doing?" Dorian stood slowly, turning his head towards Soren. The movement was deliberate, unhurried, like a predator deciding whether to strike. And that was when the entire street seemed to change. Because Dorian Cross didn't raise his voice, he didn't curse, he didn't need to. He simply said, "If you touch him again, I'll break every bone in your hand." The words were quiet, calm, final. Soren scoffed, but the look in his eyes flashed with unease. He glanced at the security guards flanking Dorian, then back at Dorian himself. Everyone knew the truth. Soren feared Dorian. Everyone did. Kieran realized it in that moment, watching Soren's bravado crack at the edges. Soren wasn't the most powerful Alpha in this scenario. He never had been. Dorian turned back to Kieran, ignoring Soren like he was irrelevant. "Stay awake," Dorian said. "I'm getting you to a hospital." Kieran's lips trembled. "I can't pay," he whispered, voice breaking. Dorian's eyes narrowed just slightly. "You think I'm asking?" And then Dorian lifted him. Not roughly, not possessively, like he was carrying something precious. Kieran's hands clutched at Dorian's shirt, rain-soaked and trembling, tears streaming down his face as the world blurred around them. He could hear Soren shouting something behind them, but the words didn't matter anymore. Because for the first time in months, Kieran felt something he'd forgotten existed. Safety. Behind them, Soren's voice rang out, desperate now, trying to regain control. Let him go, Cross, he's nobody. Dorian didn't even look back. But his answer came like a death sentence, low and absolute. He's somebody now. And as Dorian carried Kieran toward the black car waiting at the curb, Kieran's vision started to fade, darkness creeping in at the edges. The last thing he heard before unconsciousness claimed him was the sound of car doors opening and Dorian's voice, calm and commanding, giving orders Kieran couldn't understand. What would Kieran wake up to, and why did Dorian's scent feel like home when it should have felt like danger? Kieran woke to the sound of machines beeping in steady rhythm, a sound that felt both alien and strangely comforting. His eyelids were heavy, like someone had weighted them down while he slept. He tried to move, but his body didn't respond right away, limbs sluggish and disconnected. Where was he? The ceiling above him was white, sterile, marked with fluorescent lights that hummed softly. Hospital. He was in a hospital. Panic spiked through his chest. The baby. His hand flew to his stomach, pressing against the thin hospital gown, searching for movement, for reassurance, for anything that told him the life inside him was still there. He's alive. The voice came from his left, low and steady. Kieran turned his head, muscles protesting, and saw Dorian sitting in a chair beside the bed. He looked the same as he had in the rain, tailored and composed, except now his shirt was wrinkled and his hair was slightly damp, like he hadn't bothered to change. Like he'd stayed. Kieran's throat tightened. The baby, he whispered, voice raw. Alive, Dorian repeated. Barely. The doctors stabilized you both, but they said you're at risk for early labor, you need rest, and you need to stay somewhere safe. Kieran swallowed hard, relief and terror warring inside him. The baby was alive, that was all that mattered, but early labor meant danger, it meant fragility, it meant everything could still fall apart. Why are you still here? Kieran asked, voice barely audible. Dorian's gaze didn't waver. Because I said I would be. It wasn't an explanation, it was a statement, final, unquestionable. Kieran looked away, staring at the IV line taped to his arm, at the monitors tracking his heartbeat and oxygen levels. He felt exposed, vulnerable, like every secret he'd tried to bury was now laid bare in this sterile room. A nurse came in, clipboard in hand, smiling gently. Mr. Vale, she said, we have your discharge paperwork ready. You'll need to follow up with an obstetrician within the week, and you'll need someone to monitor you at home. Do you have family nearby? Kieran's chest tightened. No, he said quietly. The nurse glanced at her clipboard, then back at him, looking slightly flustered. Well, it says here that your emergency contact is Dorian Cross. Kieran's head snapped toward Dorian. What? The nurse looked between them, clearly uncomfortable. I'll give you two a moment, she said, backing out of the room quickly. Kieran stared at Dorian, confusion and anger, and something else swirling inside him. I didn't put you down as my emergency contact, Kieran said. I know, Dorian replied calmly. Then why? Because I'm taking responsibility. The words hung in the air, heavy and impossible. Kieran shook his head, voice rising slightly. Wise, you don't even know me, you don't owe me anything. Dorian leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, gaze sharp and unwavering. Soren Halwick owes me a debt, he said, a significant one, and the quickest way to destroy a man like him is to take what he thinks he can throw away. Kieran's breath caught. He wasn't stupid, he understood what Dorian was saying. This wasn't kindness, this was strategy. Dorian was using him as leverage, as a weapon against Soren. So I'm just a pawn, Kieran said, voice bitter. Dorian's expression didn't change. No, he said, you're leverage, there's a difference. Kieran wanted to be angry. He wanted to shout, to tell Dorian to leave him alone, to let him figure this out on his own. But the truth was he had no one, no family, no money, nowhere to go. And Dorian knew that. Dorian stood, straightening his coat. There's something else, he said, voice dropping lower. Something Soren doesn't know about your baby. Kieran's heart pounded. What? Dorian's jaw tightened, like he was deciding how much to say. Your baby carries something rare, he said carefully, an air marker. Kieran stared at him, not understanding. What's an air marker? Dorian's eyes sharpened. A genetic indicator, proof that the child carries lineage traits strong enough to claim leadership dominance. It's rare, syndicates have killed for it. The words hit Kieran like a physical blow. His baby, his child, the life he'd been trying so desperately to protect wasn't just a pregnancy, it was a target. How do you know? Kieran whispered. Because I've been looking for one, Dorian said. The Cross Syndicate has been searching for an air marker for years, and when I saw you outside that clinic, when I saw the way Soren was treating you, I had my people run a discreet scan while you were unconscious. Kieran's hands trembled. You scanned me without my permission. Yes. No apology, no justification, just honesty. Kieran didn't know whether to be furious or terrified. So what happens now? He asked, voice shaking. You take my baby. Dorian's gaze softened just slightly. No, he said, I protect you, both of you, because that baby isn't just Soren's anymore, that baby is power, and power needs to be protected. Kieran wanted to argue, wanted to run, but exhaustion pulled at him, and the machines around him beeped steadily, reminding him how fragile everything was. Before he could respond, a security guard whispered something to Dorian from the doorway. Dorian's expression darkened. He turned back to Kieran, voice low and urgent. They found us. Kieran's blood turned to ice. Who found them and how much time did they have left? Dorian moved fast. He crossed the room in 2 strides, pulling his phone from his pocket and typing something Kieran couldn't see. His expression was controlled, but there was something sharp in his eyes now, something dangerous. Who found us? Kieran asked, voice trembling. Rivals, Dorian said without looking up. Someone at the clinic reported your condition. Word travels fast in this world. Kieran's chest tightened. He tried to sit up, but pain shot through his abdomen and he gasped, falling back against the pillows. Don't move, Dorian said sharply. You'll tear something. But they're coming. And we're leaving. 2 more guards appeared in the doorway, both dressed in black, both carrying an authority that made the hospital staff step aside without question. One of them wheeled in a transport chair. The other disconnected Kieran's IV line with practiced efficiency, wrapping the site quickly. Wait, Kieran said, panic rising. I can't just leave, the doctors. The doctors stabilized you, Dorian interrupted. That's all they can do, the rest is up to us. Kieran wanted to argue, but the look in Dorian's eyes told him this wasn't negotiable. One of the guards lifted Kieran carefully, placing him in the transport chair. Kieran's hands gripped the armrests, knuckles white, heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. Dorian led them through back hallways, away from the main hospital corridors. The guards flanked them, silent and alert, eyes scanning every corner, every doorway. Kieran could hear voices echoing somewhere behind them, footsteps that didn't belong to hospital staff. They were being followed. How many? Dorian asked quietly. 3 confirmed, one of the guards replied, possibly more in the parking garage. Dorian's jaw tightened. They reached a service elevator, and Dorian pressed the button. The doors opened immediately. And they all stepped inside. Kieran's hands trembled as the elevator descended, the numbers ticking down slowly, agonizingly slowly. What if they catch us? Kieran whispered. Dorian glanced down at him, expression unreadable. They won't. It wasn't reassurance, it was a fact. The elevator stopped on the ground floor, and the doors opened to a dim, industrial hallway lined with supply carts and maintenance equipment. Dorian led them to a side exit, pushing the door open to reveal a black SUV idling in the alley. The guard wheeling Kieran moved fast, lifting him out of the chair and into the back seat. Dorian slid in beside him, and the doors slammed shut. Go, Dorian said. The driver didn't hesitate. The SUV lurched forward, tires screeching as they pulled out of the alley and onto the main road. Kieran looked out the back window and saw 3 men in dark coats emerging from the hospital exit, watching them leave. One of them lifted a phone to his ear. "They're calling it in," the guard in the passenger seat said. Dorian's expression darkened. "Then we move faster." Kieran's hands pressed against his stomach, instinctively protecting the baby even though they were already moving, already running. "Where are we going?" he asked. "Somewhere safe," Dorian replied, "somewhere they can't reach you." Kieran wanted to believe him, but safe felt like a word that didn't exist anymore. They drove for 20 minutes, weaving through streets and side roads, the driver checking mirrors constantly. Kieran could feel every bump, every sharp turn, pain radiating through his abdomen with each movement. Finally, the SUV pulled through a gated entrance and into a private estate. The mansion was massive, modern and imposing, surrounded by high walls and security cameras. The car stopped in front of the entrance, and Dorian got out, motioning for the guards to help Kieran. Kieran was carried inside, through marble halls and into a bedroom that looked more like a luxury hotel suite than a place someone actually lived. The bed was enormous, covered in soft white linens, and there was a private bathroom attached. The guards set Kieran down on the bed, and he sank into the mattress, exhausted and trembling. Dorian dismissed the guards with a nod, and they left, closing the door behind them. Kieran looked up at Dorian, voice shaking. "You said Soren didn't just abandon me," Kieran said quietly. "What did you mean?" Dorian's expression hardened. "I mean he didn't leave you because he didn't want the baby," Dorian said. "He left you because he sold information about your pregnancy to rival syndicates. He traded your life for power." Kieran's breath stopped. "What?" Dorian pulled a small device from his pocket, a recording device, and set it on the bedside table. "I have proof," Dorian said, "recordings of him negotiating. He planned to let you die in that rain, and then, once you were gone, he was going to have the baby taken and raised as leverage." Kieran's vision blurred with tears. Not from sadness, from rage, from betrayal so deep it felt like his chest was caving in. "He wanted me dead," Kieran whispered. "Yes." The word was final, absolute. Kieran's hands trembled, and he pressed them against his face, trying to hold himself together. Dorian crouched beside the bed, voice low and steady. "He didn't just betray you," Dorian said. "He tried to erase you." Kieran looked at him, tears streaming down his face. "Why are you telling me this?" Dorian's eyes sharpened. "Because you deserve to know the truth, and because I'm going to make him pay for it." Kieran's breath hitched. "How?" Dorian stood, jaw tight. "By making him confess, publicly." And that was when Kieran understood. This wasn't just about protection. This was about justice. But before Kieran could respond, Dorian's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and his expression darkened. "They're moving faster than I thought," Dorian said quietly. Kieran's heart pounded. What were they planning, and how much time did they have before everything exploded? Dorian stared at his phone for a long moment, jaw tight, eyes sharp with calculation. Whatever message he'd received, it wasn't good. Kieran sat on the edge of the bed, hands pressed against his stomach, trying to breathe through the panic rising in his chest. He could feel it now, the weight of everything, the realization that his baby wasn't just a pregnancy, it was a target, a prize, something people would kill for. "What's happening?" Kieran asked, voice barely above a whisper. Dorian pocketed his phone and turned to face him. "The syndicates know about the air marker," he said bluntly. "Word got out faster than I expected. They're moving against us." Kieran's blood ran cold. "How many?" "3 major families," Dorian said. "All of them want the child, some want to claim it, others want to eliminate the competition." Kieran's hands trembled. "Eliminate?" Dorian's gaze didn't waver. "They'll kill you to prevent anyone else from having the air marker." The words hit like a punch to the gut. Kieran couldn't breathe, couldn't think. His vision swam and he gripped the bedsheets, trying to anchor himself. "I can't," he whispered. "I can't do this, I can't." "You can," Dorian interrupted, voice firm. "And you will, because you're not alone anymore." Kieran looked up at him, tears blurring his vision. "Why do you care?" he asked, voice breaking. "You don't know me, you don't owe me anything, so why are you doing this?" Dorian was silent for a moment, studying him with that same unreadable expression. Because Soren made a mistake, Dorian said finally. He thought he could throw you away and get away with it. He thought no one would care, but I do. Why? Because power isn't just about taking, Dorian said. It's about protecting what matters, and that baby matters, not just because of what it represents, but because it's yours. Kieran's chest tightened. He didn't know what to say, didn't know how to process the fact that this Alpha, this dangerous, powerful man, was standing here telling him he mattered. Dorian's phone buzzed again. He glanced at it, then back at Kieran. I need to meet with my people, Dorian said. Figure out our next move. You'll be safe here. The estate is secure. No one gets in without my permission. Kieran nodded, throat tight. Dorian started toward the door, then paused, looking back. There's something else you need to know, he said quietly. Kieran's heart pounded. What? Soren didn't just sell information about your pregnancy, Dorian said. He's been negotiating with one of the rival families. He's planning to testify against you, claim you stole the pregnancy from him, that you're unstable, that the child should be taken for its own safety. Kieran's breath stopped. He's going to take my baby. He's going to try, Dorian said, but he won't succeed, because we're going to expose him first. How? Dorian's eyes sharpened. By making him confess in front of every syndicate leader in Boston, by playing the recordings, by showing them exactly what kind of man he is. Kieran's hands trembled. And if he doesn't confess? Dorian's jaw tightened. Then I'll make him. The promise in those words was absolute, final. Kieran believed him. Dorian left, closing the door behind him, and Kieran was alone. He lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, one hand pressed against his stomach. The baby moved slightly, a small flutter that made Kieran's heart ache. I won't let them take you, he whispered. I promise. But even as he said it, fear clawed at his chest. Because Soren wasn't just cruel. He was smart, connected, powerful. And Kieran was just an Omega who'd trusted the wrong Alpha. Hours passed. Kieran tried to rest, but his mind wouldn't stop racing. He could hear voices downstairs, muffled but urgent. Dorian was planning something big. And Kieran was at the center of it. A knock on the door made him jump. Come in, he said quietly. One of Dorian's guards entered, carrying a tray of food. Mr. Cross wanted to make sure you ate, the guard said, setting the tray on the bedside table. Kieran stared at the food, soup and bread and fruit, simple but carefully prepared. Thank you, he murmured. The guard nodded and left. Kieran ate slowly, mechanically, not tasting anything. His mind was elsewhere, replaying everything Dorian had said. Soren had tried to erase him. Soren had wanted him dead. The man he'd loved, the man he'd trusted, had betrayed him in the worst way possible. And now, syndicates were hunting him. Kieran's hand pressed against his stomach again, protective and desperate. What if Dorian couldn't stop them? What if they found a way in? What if? The door opened again, and Dorian stepped inside. He looked different now, sharper, more dangerous, like he'd made a decision. It's time, Dorian said. Kieran's heart pounded. Time for what? Dorian's eyes locked onto his. Time to end this. And in that moment, Kieran realized what was coming, the final confrontation, the moment when everything would either be destroyed or reborn, and there was no turning back now. The hospital corridor stretched long and sterile under flickering fluorescent lights. Kieran gripped the IV pole, knuckles white, as Dorian's guards moved him through back hallways at a pace that made his heart hammer against his ribs. Something was wrong. Dorian walked ahead, phone pressed to his ear, voice low and clipped. He ended the call and turned to the guard on his right. How many entrances are compromised? 3, the guard replied. Main lobby, emergency bay, and the west parking structure. Dorian's jaw tightened. They're boxing us in. Kieran's breath came faster. Pain radiated through his lower abdomen, sharp and insistent, a reminder that his body was barely holding together. He pressed his free hand against his stomach, trying to will the baby to stay safe, to stay alive. Mr. Cross, one of the guards said, voice urgent. Movement on the 3rd floor, 2 unknowns heading toward the service elevator. Dorian stopped walking. For a moment, everything went silent except for the hum of overhead lights and the distant beep of medical equipment. Then Dorian spoke, voice calm and deadly. "Get him to the car, now." The guards moved faster, one of them scooping Kieran up without warning. Kieran gasped, pain exploding across his ribs, but he bit down on the cry, threatening to escape. They couldn't afford noise, couldn't afford attention. They reached a metal door marked, staff only, and pushed through into a concrete stairwell that smelled like disinfectant and old cigarettes. The guard carrying Kieran took the steps 2 at a time, and every jolt sent agony through Kieran's body. "Almost there," Dorian said from behind them. But Kieran heard something else. Footsteps. Above them, coming down fast. Dorian heard it too. He stopped, one hand lifting in a silent command. Everyone froze. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Dorian pulled something from inside his coat, a gun, matte black and efficient, and held it low at his side. Kieran's heart stopped. This was real, this wasn't just running, this was war. A figure appeared on the landing above them, dressed in dark clothes, face obscured by shadows. The man's hand moved toward his waistband. Dorian didn't hesitate. "Don't." The word cut through the stairwell like a blade. The man froze, hand hovering. "Walk away," Dorian said quietly. "Tell whoever sent you that Kieran Vale is under my protection, and if anyone tries this again, I won't be asking twice." The man stared at Dorian for a long moment, weighing his options. Then he slowly backed up the stairs, disappearing into the shadows above. Dorian didn't lower the gun until the footsteps faded completely. "Move," he said. They burst through the ground floor exit into a narrow alley where a black SUV waited, engine running. The guard shoved Kieran into the back seat, and Dorian slid in beside him, slamming the door. "Go," Dorian ordered. The driver peeled out, tires screeching against wet pavement. Kieran looked through the rear window and saw 3 men in dark coats emerging from the hospital entrance, watching them disappear into traffic. One of them lifted a phone. Kieran's hands shook. "They're calling someone," he whispered. "I know," Dorian said. "Who are they?" Dorian's expression was stone. "Mercenaries, hired by the Castellano family. They want the baby before anyone else can claim it." Kieran's vision blurred with tears. He pressed both hands against his stomach, feeling the baby shift slightly inside him. "They're going to kill me," he whispered. "No," Dorian said, voice flat and absolute. "They're not." The SUV swerved onto a side street, then another, weaving through Boston like they were being chased by ghosts. Kieran could feel wetness between his legs again, warm and terrifying. Blood. He was bleeding. "Dorian," he said, voice breaking. Dorian looked down and saw it immediately. "How much?" he asked the guard in front. 10 minutes to the estate." "Make it 5. The driver pushed harder. Kieran closed his eyes, trying to breathe through the pain, trying to ignore the voice in his head screaming that he was losing the baby, that everything was falling apart. When they finally pulled through the gates of Dorian's estate, Kieran was barely conscious. Strong hands lifted him out of the car and carried him inside, upstairs and into a room that smelled like lavender and clean linen. A woman was waiting, older, calm, with steady hands and kind eyes. "I'm Dr. Reeves," she said gently. "I'm going to take care of you." Kieran wanted to respond, but darkness pulled at him, dragging him under. The last thing he heard was Dorian's voice, low and dangerous. "Find out who leaked the location, and make sure they don't leak anything ever again." Would Kieran wake up, or had they already lost everything that mattered? Kieran woke to silence. Not the beeping of machines or the hum of hospital equipment. Just silence, heavy and complete, broken only by the sound of his own breathing. He opened his eyes slowly, squinting against soft lamplight. He was in a bedroom, massive and pristine, with tall windows covered by thick curtains. The bed beneath him was soft, almost too soft, like he might sink into it and disappear. His hand flew to his stomach. Still round, still there. He exhaled shakily, relief flooding through him so fast it made him dizzy. The baby was alive. The door opened and Dr. Reeves stepped in, carrying a medical bag. "You're awake," she said gently. "How are you feeling?" "Sore," Kieran whispered, "but the baby." Stable, Dr. Reeves said. For now, but you're on bed rest, complete bed rest. Any more stress, any more running, and you could go into early labor. Kieran nodded, throat tight. Dr. Reeves checked his vitals, then his abdomen, her touch professional and careful. When she finished, she gave him a small smile. You're strong, she said, stronger than you think. Kieran didn't feel strong, he felt broken. After Dr. Reeves left, Dorian entered the room. He looked different now, sharper, like he'd shed some invisible armor, and what remained underneath was colder, more dangerous. We need to talk, Dorian said. Kieran pushed himself up slightly, wincing. About what? Dorian pulled a chair close to the bed and sat, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. About Soren, he said, and what he's been doing while you've been fighting for your life. Kieran's chest tightened. What do you mean? Dorian pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. Then he turned it toward Kieran. It was a recording, audio only. Soren's voice came through, clear and unmistakable. The Omega's unstable, always has been. I tried to help him, but he wouldn't listen. Now he's claiming the baby's mine, but I have witnesses who will testify otherwise. If the Castellanos want the air marker, they can have it. Just make sure Vale doesn't survive the extraction. Kieran's blood turned to ice. The recording continued. Another voice, deeper, unfamiliar. And if Cross intervenes? Soren laughed. Let him, Cross doesn't care about Vale. He's using him as leverage. Once he realizes the baby's the real prize, he'll hand him over. The recording ended. Kieran stared at the phone, unable to breathe, unable to think. Soren had planned this. Not just abandonment, not just cruelty. Murder. He wanted me dead, Kieran whispered. Yes, Dorian said quietly. Kieran's hands trembled. Rage burned through him, hot and consuming, mixed with a grief so deep it felt like drowning. He tried to erase me, Kieran said, voice breaking. Dorian's jaw tightened. He did, but he failed, because you're still here, and now we're going to make him pay. Kieran looked up at him, tears streaming down his face. How? Dorian's eyes sharpened. By exposing him, publicly, in front of every syndicate leader in Boston. They'll never believe it, Kieran said. They'll think I'm lying. They'll believe the recording, Dorian said, and they'll believe you, because you're going to stand in front of them and tell them exactly what he did. Kieran's breath caught. I can't face him. You can, Dorian said firmly, because he doesn't get to control your silence anymore. Kieran closed his eyes, hands pressing against his stomach. Could he do this? Could he stand in front of Alphas and syndicate leaders and tell them the truth? Could he face Soren? What if I freeze? Kieran whispered. What if I can't speak? Then I'll speak for you, Dorian said, but I don't think you'll freeze. I think you're stronger than you realize. Kieran wanted to believe him, wanted to believe he had that kind of strength. But fear clawed at his chest. Because Soren had destroyed him once. What if he did it again? Dorian stood, pulling something from his pocket, a small box. He opened it, revealing a sleek black device, no bigger than a pen. This is a panic button, Dorian said. If anything goes wrong during the meeting, you press this, and my people will pull you out immediately. Kieran stared at it. You really think this will work? Dorian's expression was unreadable. I know it will, because Soren made a mistake. He underestimated you, and now he's going to pay for it. Kieran took the device, fingers trembling. When? He asked. Tomorrow night, Dorian said. The Syndicate Council meets every month. This time, Soren's going to confess, whether he wants to or not. And as Dorian left the room, Kieran stared at the panic button in his hand, wondering if tomorrow would bring justice or destruction. What would happen when Kieran finally faced the Alpha who tried to erase him? The estate felt different the next day, quieter, heavier, like the air itself was holding its breath. Kieran sat in the massive bedroom, staring at the clothes laid out on the bed. Simple but elegant, a dark suit that fit perfectly, tailored to hide the curve of his stomach without making it obvious he was trying to hide anything. Dr. Reeves had checked him twice that morning, confirming the baby was stable, warning him again about stress. But stress was unavoidable now. Tonight he would face Soren. Tonight he would tell the truth. A knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. "Come in," he said quietly. Dorian entered, dressed in a charcoal suit that made him look even more imposing than usual. He studied Kieran for a moment, expression unreadable. "How are you feeling?" Dorian asked. "Terrified," Kieran admitted. Dorian nodded, like he'd expected that answer. "Good," he said. "Fear means you understand the stakes. It means you'll be careful." Kieran looked down at his hands, fingers trembling slightly. "What if I can't do this?" he whispered. "What if I get up there and I can't speak?" Dorian crossed the room and crouched beside the bed, meeting Kieran's eyes. "Then you don't speak," Dorian said. "You let the recording do the talking, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think when you see him, when you remember what he did, you're going to find your voice." Kieran wanted to believe that, wanted to believe he had the strength. But doubt gnawed at him. "Why are you doing this?" Kieran asked. "Really, not because of leverage, not because of the air marker, why do you care?" Dorian was silent for a long moment. "Because I know what it's like to be erased," he said finally. "To have someone try to take everything from you and pretend you never existed. And I swore I'd never let that happen to anyone under my protection." Kieran's throat tightened. "Who tried to erase you?" Dorian's jaw tightened. "My father," he said quietly. "When I was younger, before I took control of the syndicate, he wanted me gone, wanted a different heir, someone more obedient." Kieran stared at him, seeing something raw and honest in Dorian's eyes for the first time. "What did you do?" Kieran asked. Dorian's expression hardened. "I survived, and then I made sure he couldn't hurt anyone else." Kieran understood then. This wasn't just about Soren, this was personal for Dorian too. Hours later, they left the estate in a convoy of 3 black SUVs. Kieran sat beside Dorian in the middle vehicle, hands pressed against his stomach, trying to breathe through the panic rising in his chest. The syndicate meeting was held in a private club downtown, the kind of place that didn't advertise and didn't need to. The kind of place where power gathered in shadows and made decisions that shaped the city. When they arrived, Dorian's guards surrounded Kieran, moving him through a back entrance and into a private room adjacent to the main hall. Through the walls, Kieran could hear voices, low and rumbling, dozens of Alphas gathered in one space. His heart pounded. Dorian stood by the door, checking his phone. 5 minutes, he said. Kieran's hands shook. He pressed them together, trying to steady himself. "What if they don't believe me?" he whispered. "They will," Dorian said, "because the truth is louder than lies." A guard opened the door, nodding to Dorian. It was time. Dorian looked at Kieran, expression serious. "You don't have to do this," he said. "I can play the recording and handle the rest." Kieran swallowed hard. "No," he said, voice trembling but determined. "I need to do this. He doesn't get to control my silence anymore." Dorian's eyes softened just slightly. "Then let's end this." They walked into the main hall together, and Kieran's breath caught. The room was massive, filled with Alphas in expensive suits, all of them turning to look as Dorian entered with an Omega at his side. And at the far end of the room, standing near the center table, was Soren. Their eyes met. Soren's expression shifted from surprise to fury in an instant. Dorian led Kieran to the front, positioning him beside the main podium. "Counselors," Dorian said, voice carrying across the room, "I've called this emergency session because one of our own has committed an act that threatens the integrity of every family in this room." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Soren stepped forward, voice sharp. "This is ridiculous, Cross, whatever lies you've been told." "I haven't been told anything," Dorian interrupted. "I have proof." He held up his phone, and the recording began to play. Soren's voice filled the room, clear and damning. "The Omega's unstable, always has been. If the Castellanos want the air marker, they can have it. Just make sure Vale doesn't survive the extraction." The room erupted. Alphas shouted, voices overlapping, outrage spreading like wildfire. Soren's face went pale. "That's taken out of context," he shouted. "You don't understand." Then explain, Dorian said coldly. Explain why you tried to have an Omega carrying your child killed. Soren's mouth opened, then closed. He looked around the room, searching for allies but found none. Dorian turned to Kieran. Tell them, he said quietly. Kieran's heart pounded, his hands trembled. But he looked at Soren, at the Alpha who had kicked him while he bled, and he found his voice. Would Kieran's words bring justice, or would Soren find a way to twist the truth one last time? Kieran stepped forward, legs shaking, hands pressed protectively against his stomach. Every eye in the room was on him now, dozens of Alphas watching, judging, waiting. Soren stood across from him, face twisted with rage and something else. Desperation. Kieran opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Fear locked his throat, his vision blurred. He could feel the weight of every stare, the power radiating from these men, the same kind of power that had hurt him, abandoned him, tried to erase him. Then he felt it. A hand on his shoulder, steady, grounding. Dorian. Take your time, Dorian said quietly. Kieran closed his eyes, breathed in slowly, and remembered. He remembered the rain, the clinic, the blood, the kick, Soren's words, poisonous and final. You should have gotten rid of it. Kieran opened his eyes and looked directly at Soren. You didn't just abandon me, Kieran said, voice trembling but clear. You tried to erase me. The room went silent. I trusted you, Kieran continued, words coming faster now. I believed you when you said you'd protect me, when you said we'd figure it out together, but the moment I told you I was pregnant, you disappeared. Soren's jaw tightened. That's not. You kicked me, Kieran said, voice breaking. I was bleeding, I was begging for help, and you kicked me, in front of everyone, like I was nothing. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Several Alphas exchanged glances, expressions darkening. Kieran's hands trembled. And then I found out the truth, he said. You didn't leave because you didn't want the baby. You left because you sold information about the pregnancy. You made a deal to let me die so you could take the baby later and use it as leverage. Soren's face flushed red. You're lying, he shouted. You're making this up to turn them against me. Am I? Kieran asked quietly. Dorian stepped forward, holding up his phone again. We have recordings, Dorian said. Witnesses, bank transfers. You negotiated with the Castellano family. You agreed to let them extract the air marker from Kieran, and you made sure no one would ask questions by painting him as unstable. Soren's eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape. This is a setup, he said desperately. Cross is manipulating all of you. He wants the air marker for himself. He's using Vale. I'm not using him, Dorian said coldly. I'm protecting him, something you should have done. Soren's composure cracked completely. He turned to the council members, voice rising. You're going to believe an Omega over me, he shouted. He's nobody, he doesn't belong here. And that was when Kieran realized something. Soren wasn't just cruel. He was terrified. Terrified of losing power, terrified of being exposed, terrified that the world would see him for what he really was. One of the council members, an older Alpha with silver hair and sharp eyes, stood. Enough, the man said, voice cutting through the chaos. Mr. Halwick, do you deny the authenticity of the recordings? Soren's mouth opened, then closed. It's not what it sounds like. Answer the question, the council member said sharply. Soren's hands clenched into fists. I was protecting syndicate interests, he said finally. Vale was a liability, the pregnancy was a risk, I did what needed to be done. The room exploded with outrage. Kieran's vision blurred with tears, not from sadness, from vindication. Because Soren had just confessed. The council member turned to Soren, expression cold. You have violated every code we uphold, he said. You endangered an Omega under your protection. You conspired with enemies of this council, and you attempted murder for personal gain. Soren's face went white. You can't. We can, the council member said, and we will. He turned to the rest of the council. Soren Halwick is hereby stripped of rank, title, and syndicate protection. He is exiled from Boston effective immediately. Any family found harboring him will face the same punishment. Soren staggered back, disbelief written across his face. No, he whispered. No, you can't do this. You're nothing, Dorian said quietly. Soren's eyes locked onto Kieran, filled with rage and hatred. This is your fault, he hissed. You ruined everything. Kieran looked at him, at the Alpha who had tried to destroy him, and felt something shift inside. Not fear. Not anger. Pity. No, Kieran said softly, you did this to yourself. Guards moved forward surrounding Soren. He tried to resist, shouting threats and curses, but they dragged him toward the exit. The last thing Kieran heard before the doors closed was Soren's voice, desperate and broken. You'll regret this, all of you. But the doors slammed shut and the room fell silent. Kieran's legs gave out and Dorian caught him, holding him steady. It's over, Dorian said quietly. Kieran nodded, tears streaming down his face. It was over. But as Dorian led him out of the hall, Kieran couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed forever, not just for Soren, but for him too. What would life look like now that the truth had been spoken and justice had been served? 3 weeks later, Kieran stood in the nursery, hands resting on the crib rail, staring at the tiny clothes folded neatly inside. The room was soft and warm, painted in pale blues and creams, with a window overlooking the estate gardens. He could hardly believe this was real. That he was safe. That the baby was safe. Dr. Reeves had cleared him for light activity, though she still warned him to take it easy. The bleeding had stopped, the contractions had subsided, his body was healing. But some wounds took longer than others. Kieran heard footsteps behind him and turned to see Dorian standing in the doorway, hands in his pockets, expression softer than usual. How are you feeling? Dorian asked. Better, Kieran said honestly, stronger. Dorian nodded, stepping into the room. The council finalized Soren's exile yesterday, he said. He's been stripped of everything, bank accounts frozen, properties seized, he has nothing left. Kieran looked down at his hands. Good, he said quietly. Dorian studied him for a moment. You don't sound satisfied. Kieran shook his head. I'm not looking for satisfaction, he said. I just wanted him to stop, to never be able to hurt anyone else the way he hurt me. He won't, Dorian said. I made sure of that. Kieran believed him. They stood in silence for a while, the only sound the soft ticking of the nursery clock. What happens now? Kieran asked. Dorian's expression shifted, something vulnerable flickering across his face. That depends on you, he said. Kieran looked up at him, confused. What do you mean? Dorian stepped closer, voice quiet but steady. You're free now, he said. Soren can't hurt you. The syndicates know the baby is under my protection. You can stay here as long as you need, or you can leave, build a life somewhere else. I won't stop you. Kieran's chest tightened. You'd let me go? Yes, Dorian said simply, because you're not a prisoner, you never were. Kieran stared at him, heart pounding. He thought about leaving, about starting over somewhere new, somewhere far from syndicates and alphas and danger. But then he thought about Dorian. The alpha who'd carried him through the rain, who'd protected him when no one else would, who'd given him back his voice. I don't want to leave, Kieran said quietly. Dorian's eyes widened slightly, surprise flickering across his face. You don't have to stay out of obligation, Dorian said. I didn't do this expecting. I know, Kieran interrupted, but I'm not staying out of obligation. I'm staying because I want to. Dorian was silent for a long moment, studying him. Why? He asked. Kieran took a breath. Because you didn't just save my life, he said. You gave me a reason to believe I was worth saving. Dorian's expression softened completely, walls crumbling. You were always worth saving, he said quietly. Kieran's eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't from pain. They were from hope. 2 months later, Kieran went into labor. It wasn't the terrifying emergency he'd feared. It was controlled, managed with Dr. Reeves and a full medical team standing by. Dorian never left his side. He held Kieran's hand through every contraction, every wave of pain, every moment of fear. He whispered reassurances, wiped sweat from Kieran's forehead, stayed steady when Kieran felt like he was breaking apart. And when the baby finally arrived, a healthy, screaming bundle with dark hair and tiny fists, Kieran broke down completely. "He's perfect," Kieran whispered, tears streaming down his face. Dorian looked down at the baby, something raw and unguarded in his eyes. "He is," Dorian said softly. Kieran held his son close, breathing in the scent of him, feeling the weight of him, real and alive and safe. "Thank you," Kieran whispered, looking up at Dorian, "for everything." Dorian's hand rested on Kieran's shoulder, steady and grounding. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "Yes, I do," Kieran said, "because I thought I was going to die in that rain. I thought I'd lost everything." Dorian's jaw tightened, emotion flickering across his face. "You won't ever be alone again," he said quietly. "I promise you that." Kieran believed him. Because Dorian Cross didn't make promises he couldn't keep. And as Kieran sat there, holding his son, surrounded by warmth and safety and the quiet strength of the Alpha who'd saved him, he realized something. He'd survived. Not just the rain, not just Soren, not just the syndicates. He'd survived the belief that he was nothing. And now he was building something new. A family, a future, a life worth living. Because real strength didn't come from dominance or power. It came from protecting what mattered. And Kieran mattered. His son mattered. And together they would never be erased again. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you believe that even in the darkest moments there's hope for justice and healing, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another story. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Together, we can inspire others to find their strength and reclaim their voice.